I'd like to say good morning and thanks to Finance Magnets for inviting me along to talk a little bit more about open banking solutions. But maybe just to get started, I'll just introduce myself quickly. My name's Chris Truce, and I've actually been working for Saxo for nearly 10 years. So back when the company was around about 300 employees, and primarily most of those employees were focused on technology. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Saxo, but it is quite a technology-orientated banking institution. Prior to Saxo, I'd been working at quite a few large investment banks, Macquarie Bank of Australia, ANZ in Australia and New Zealand, and also ING from the Netherlands. But most of my time has been spent around institutional sales, so I am coming out of more of a commercial space in what I want to show you around open banking. But that being said, I would probably say I am more of a product guy, so I've been involved with the redevelopment of fixed servers at Saxo Bank, and also a lot of breaking down Saxo's monolithic systems into compartmentalized services, and then adding this into a new product or API service layer, which we at Saxo call OpenAPI. So that's just a little bit about what I've been doing in the last couple of years. But maybe just to kick off, I would just like to say I'm not really going to stand here and sell you anything about Saxo. It's a pretty open dialogue. This is just a little bit of my thought leadership on what I've sort of seen in dealing with some of the tier 1 and tier 2 banking specifically institutions, and sort of what I've seen from a macroeconomic view. And really the three things that I wanted to get across here is that there is a new economy. There's a new way of generating value that we're actually seeing with a lot of our financial institutions. It's very much revolves around the user first, so it's really about the user experience. And then finally, I would say the third theme there is that what is needed to create and develop these businesses in financial services is very much an API first technology stack. So it's not necessarily about bringing a broker in a box and having a platform that you can sort of slap another brand on and sell as your own. Institutions are really looking at offering an authentic client experience of their own and looking to integrate products and services within that particular user experience. And just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, we've seen that the economy is changing from this collaborative and personal way, in the sense that in other industries you've seen these institutions, for example, base their business models on customers sharing more and owning less. And I'm not advocating that that's exactly what's going to happen with financial services, but I am advocating that the premise on which those businesses are based around assets being shared more. So from a financial services point of view, Saxo being able to actually share, provide, and leverage our own assets more and more to an external ecosystem as much as an internal one for our own employees is becoming a much more critical part of our business strategy. And a bit of background here is, if you think from an economic point of view, we sort of started with an agrarian economy where you sort of grow things in the ground, pull them out of the ground, or graze them on the ground. And that was an economy based on commodities. You took that commodity and you sold it and you created value. Then we went through this whole industrial revolution and we figured out how to put commodities together. So now you figured out how to sort of manufacture a chair or whatever it is. And we moved the creation of value from a commodity-based economy to a goods-based economy. When we actually figured out how to create a good and sort of deliver it on demand with some kind of customization, that sort of took the economy to the next step, which is this service-based economy, and arguably that's where we all live today, where institutions, just take banks for example, have created value by adding more and more services. If I have 3 services and I'm missing the 4th and I add the 4th service, then the aggregation of those 4 services is greater than the 3. So that is sort of how they generated economic value. But now what we're seeing is this shift towards a more experience-based economy, meaning that the real economic value is generated by the actual experience that the client is generating, that institutions are focused on delivering such a authentic client experience tailored specifically to that one individual, and that's where the value is essentially driven. And that sort of spurs other sort of major themes you've seen in the internet industry as a whole, like the Internet of Things and big data analytics, and these sort of things stem a lot from that particular experience-based economy. And I know this is a bit of a silly example, but I always use coffee because it's a very illustrative one. If you look at coffee as a commodity, it's maybe a couple of cents max per cup as a value. But if you take that commodity, you grind it, you put it in a bag, you put it on a shelf, and then take that ground coffee and put it in a cup, maybe it's worth 20 cents per cup max. But if you then take that ground coffee, put it in a machine, put the machine in 7-Eleven and get someone to press a button so they get a coffee in a cup, then you can charge maybe a buck, maybe $2 for that cup of coffee. But if you take that coffee and then you put it in, I don't know, like a suburban coffee shop in Melbourne, Australia, with some nice leather chairs and some wood surroundings and a hipster with a long beard and does some nice little stuff on top of your latte, then you're going to pay $6, $7, $8 for your cup of coffee. And really what that is that value is driven by that coffee maker's ability to give you such a personal experience, an experience that you're willing to pay for. And really, the way I would show this, I just like playing a little bit with the photos, but it really is a battle over the customer experience now. And what I mean by that is you have this dichotomy between full stack companies and platform companies. And I'm not just talking about financial services, I'm talking about like the internet industry as a whole. So a full stack business is maybe something that owns the entire value chain. So this is anything from R&D to marketing. Typically they own the full sales distribution channel. So a famous company that's a good example of a full stack company is Apple. Tesla is another one that owns everything and the own distribution channel. But I mean, for those, I don't know how many of you in the room are actually working at banking institutions, but traditional banking products and services is a full stack business. They're quite profitable businesses, but they are quite hard to scale. They've always owned everything from R&D to marketing. They've always owned all the sales and distribution, but they're cost-heavy organizations and complex organizations to scale. So that's the challenges they face. On the flip side, you have these platform businesses. And what I mean by a platform business is it's essentially this UI, user interface layer that sits between a user, a client, and a vast supply system. And then typically the whole relationship is digital. So it's really this user interface, this user experience that owns the entire relationship with the end individual. And what they're really successful at doing is avoiding a lot of the supply costs and complexities whilst maximizing in an experience-based economy the value that can be derived from a better user experience. And the best way that I can sort of explain this is just to go through some really, really basic examples. The largest retailer in the world, Alibaba, does not have inventory. I mean, that's a fact. The largest media company in the world does not produce the media. the largest, or the second largest, I should say, source of music revenue in the music industry. Doesn't have anything to do with producing music. You obviously know the largest hotel company in the world doesn't own hotels, and the largest taxi company in the world doesn't own taxis. But I do want to talk a little bit about WhatsApp, because a lot of people in financial services draw analogies with the telecommunications industry. But if you just really have a look at WhatsApp for a second to emphasize some of the points I've been talking about from a high level point of view, you basically have the largest instant message provider in the world has no telecommunications. So just to put this into perspective, you have telecommunication companies around the world. They're quite regional, quite complex organizations, cost-heavy organizations. They're a good example of full-stack businesses. They offered instant messaging services on all sorts of different devices. But at the end of the day, these mobile devices are part of the key towards the relationship with the end user. Then you ended up having a couple of guys come together, which is the WhatsApp founders, between 5 guys. So let me say it again. Before they hired their 6th employee at WhatsApp, they had already aggregated in total 1 billion downloads of their application. So just to put it into perspective, that thin user experience layer, in this case just simply an application that allows instant messaging between users, was developed by 5 guys and was downloaded by 1 billion people before they hired their 6th employee. It's just to give you an idea of how a company is able to avoid the cost and complexity by focusing on the user experience layer. And as you guys all know, or those that don't, WhatsApp was actually sold to Facebook for $19 billion, but really what the acquisition was all about is it's buying that user experience layer that connects into these billion-plus users. From my point of view, I really like that example as it sort of forces the dialogue around the creation of value in relation to UIs and user experiences as opposed to developing products and services within a technology stack. And then, since we're all in the finance industry, the largest lender, like the largest fintech lender in the world, doesn't make loans either. Lufax, Chinese company, I think their market cap's almost at 10 billion, arguably now. And again, they are making no loans themselves, a peer-to-peer business. So, I mean, in its essence, what this is really all about is the unbundling or the rebundling of things. So it's about organizations being able to look at their sort of legacy systems, monolithic systems, and being able to unbundle those monolithic systems into the key services or products that they are, and then being able to make hard decisions about getting rid of something or keeping something else. And that is part of the road to success. And just speaking from experience at Saxo, we are a proprietary house, so we developed all of our systems internally. And we also dealt with a lot of cost and complexity. We had all these different platforms running on different backends with all different feeds into our database systems. And a decision that was made in around 2010 and 11 was about reorganizing this system into one sort of API or service layer where we'd unbundled our services into key service groups, and then developing an API layer on top of that so that clients, both institutional and direct for that matter, but focusing on institutional clients first, could pick and choose the services that they needed to integrate into their system. So as much as it was about getting rid of something and keeping something else, it was also about adding other products or services into that stack. A good example of this from Saxo's point of view is that we're never going to be the best in the world at chart analytics, for example. So we went to a third-party provider that could provide the analytic algorithms that we could integrate into our own system and have it as a separate service group that could be directed out through our own API, and maybe a point that I should have emphasized from the start, into our own platforms first. So all our own apps, or at least our next generation apps, run on our own API. So we dog food at Saxo. So we first use it ourselves before we offer it out to third parties. That's Saxo's story, but I'm not saying that it's that if you don't do all of that, you can't improve. I mean, the reality is organizations, and particularly the tier 1, tier 2 banks that I'm seeing, have already started the unbundling of things. They're already looking at their own systems, figuring out how to separate certain services from other services. And to be honest, they are going to be able to get rid of the stuff that they don't need and add the things that they do and improve where they are. I'm a bit of an athlete, so try to use the high jump sort of analogy here. So before you had the modern high jump era, you basically had this straddle and the Western roll. So these athletes iterated on the norm and continually improved and were able to incrementally increase the height of the bar. So this is back in sort of like the late 60s. But if you really want to actually change, it's really about that rebundling. So it's about looking outside of your own organization, and that's quite a hard, it's an easier decision for some of the smaller organizations because you're a lot more agile and innovative. But for larger institutions that have a full stack mindset where they have to build themselves, it can be a tough, or it has historically been a tough sell. So I would say the historical 5 years for a banking institution to outsource key components of their value chain is a tough sell. The next 5 years for banking institutions to outsource key components of their value chain, in my opinion, personal opinion, but also in the opinion of Saxo, we feel that outsourcing ability, or the likelihood of outsourcing, is going to increase. So these institutions are changing. They are continually going to look at rebundling products and services from not just companies like Saxo, but I'm sure there's a few people in the audience as well coming from technology companies, specialized software companies that have a lot of value to add to institutions. But the point I would emphasize here is the progressive institutions are going to be the ones that invest in their own user experience. So for you to be a part of that, it's really an API-first technology stack that you need to focus on. You need to be able to deliver the product or service that you are delivering today in an API-enabled way that allows that potential institution to integrate that natively, seamlessly, authentically into their own user interfaces. So just to try and keep on time, I really wanted to just talk a little bit about what I've been doing at Saxo. So a typical conversation with a tier 1 or tier 2 bank goes something around, they have financial budgets that are already budgeted probably for 12, 24 months ahead of schedule, ahead of time, I should say, typically divided into an OPEX and a CAPEX budget. And what I'm typically trying to emphasize to them, I don't really have a pointer, but this part of your organization, your infrastructure, your ability to connect into all of the external venues, to maintain thousands and thousands of concurrent users at any given second that are trying to access your applications in a modern user interface, it is expensive. And even to maintain this particular piece of infrastructure, the cost and complexity involved in that is astronomical and only rising. And the problem with that is so much money then goes in to the OPEX budget of maintaining this one, that the UI and the UX, which I'm trying to advocate in this room, is possibly the most important thing in financial services. We've seen these UI layers generate billions of dollars in other industries, even in telecommunications industries, which from a transactional point of view is quite similar to financial services. that they're underserving from an investment point of view, the UI UX layer. So our high level pitch when we're sort of walking in there is to show them that with an open banking solution, we're able to do all of this connectivity, also from a backflow point of view to connect into themselves if they want to maintain certain flow on their own local equities market, for example, and maybe even connecting into other custodians for that matter. But we are the ones that manage that whole entire business, including, you know, all of the pre-trade margin, pre-trade margin checks, all of the post-trade products and services, the people behind that as well, IT hosting, IT management, IT development. You know, the list is quite long in regards to what this really is. And at the end of the day, not to steal a term from other industries, but it is BaaS. It is a business as a service. And that's essentially what we're trying to do, which has historically been a tough sell because they're not looking at outsourcing key components of a value chain to a third party. But as I've tried to emphasize, we think that this is changing. We emphasize that we can take this cost on board and we get the critical mass because we do it with 120 other institutions as well. We manage all the concurrent connections to all your individual users. We can connect in a federated way into all of your own security systems that you have for your own clients, allowing them to reappropriate a lot of their OpEx budget and direct their CapEx budget a lot more focused on the UI UX, which allows them to develop or modernize this particular technology stack, which doesn't just benefit Saxo, because it's a deal for me and I make my money on brokerage, but it's also for all of the third-party technology firms out there that are looking to sell into the larger institutions as well. When you have an institution that's developed on a modern technology stack, it makes the salability of your own products greater into these particular institutions. And quite frankly, I've been trying to align myself as an employee of Saxo with a lot of these third-party software companies. I really want you guys to engage as much as possible, so if you have any questions, shout out. But I thought I'd just go through and speak out loud around a few case studies that I've worked on. So basically what an API-enabled technology stack has allowed me to do is to sort of branch out of financial services to sort of connect into some other industries as well. One that I like is actually news. So a public deal of ours, we did a deal with Wall Street in China, so Wall Street CN, and they basically have, you know, when you talk China, they always throw ridiculous numbers in the air, but arguably what they had is a certain amount of visitors on a website that they wanted to generate more money from. And rather than using a traditional affiliate program where essentially you just direct the pipe somewhere else, goes to an affiliate generates $1 and gives you 50 cents of it back. They wanted to try and keep visitors on their own assets, on their own user experience, and they developed their interface to have a trading-like strategy there. And basically, we integrated in behind that. We allowed them to onboard clients digitally with our APIs. Then we allowed them to trade directly, both in simulation and in live environments for that matter, from their own interfaces to be able to generate a different course of media or revenue for themselves in China. There's a lot of different case studies here. I'm happy to go into them, and maybe they're more relevant to some than others. But perhaps it's better just to take some questions before we actually run out of time. So please, if there's anything, it's a workshop, let me know.
On the Chinese example,
yeah.
So they had no trading interface before. You allowed them to have the ability to have their clients.
Yeah. So
just doing the revenue split on the brokerage.
yeah. So the commercials I probably can't talk too much, but actually it wasn't all about brokerage. Just to get that in. And it wasn't entirely a trading interface. It was almost gamification of the content. So you have, and not gamification in a gambling way, but gamification in an educational way. So you have an article written to a trade happening at a broker somewhere, and there's a long journey narrative in between that, which I've talked to other people around this sort of flow, and it's around trying to capitalize on certain parts of that narrative in their case. They also went to a third-party technology provider to help them with that, by the way. So it wasn't just, Saxo was just the facilitator in that case. Yeah. Michael?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have one question. You mentioned that you're offering your own API, meaning that you're using it for yourself first. I'm imagining there's a lot of good things to that, meaning that you flush out any issues before it kind of goes outside the building. But do you then also see the flip side of that, or have you seen it, that if you're the buyer and the seller, then sometimes the roles and responsibilities may not be arm's length commercial kind of. But do you see that as has been an issue? And where do you see yourself in regards to now switching the buyer of the API to a third party? Is it, have you gotten to that place now where it's full arm's length?
So I'm not sure I specifically in my role have seen too much of a dichotomy there, but if anything, what I would say is those who are familiar with Saxo, we come out of a white labeling background. 50% of our revenue direct, 50% coming from other companies that resold our platform as their own. And as we've sort of come on, Saxo's been struggling a little bit to define themselves, but really what Saxo is at its core is a facilitator. So with an API-enabled technology stack now going to third parties as our own, I mean, we really have no value to add here. We're never going to be 1 billion downloads on a Saxo Bank app, for that matter, not even close. But I'm not advocating that the bank of the future is also going to be this thin layer and have no supply, but just connecting into everyone. But I would argue that you've seen it in other industries. Regulation is fragmented the supply chain anyway, so that if you are going to get onto this thin layer, and WhatsApp did it with telecommunications, it is plausible that value is really going to be derived in that relationship with the user, and that's digital. And that's digital today, and even more digital moving forward. So I would say that now that we have the API for third parties, which is not just direct, but it's the full partner APIs in a modern technology stack as well, it's helped define Saxo a little bit more. It's helped push Saxo out of this. Saxo Trader Go is the greatest platform, maybe. But it's really defined us in this enabler section, facilitator section. And quite frankly, it is something I think we are better at as an organization, Saxo. So that's all I have, apparently, time-wise, Dan. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much.